Uh, Thank you. Um, this trip came about through relationships. So several years ago, I was contacted by a venerable Vietnamese nun named Venerable Tuan Bach, and through someone who is attending to her, whose name is Pearl, and who is now ordained as a nun, is now named Tan Chao at this time. And they came to visit here, and we had a lovely time and had some tea. And then afterwards, Venerable Tuan Bach said, well, I really came here to ask your permission to publish my translation of your first book into Vietnamese. So I was like, well, I think so. Yeah, I would allow that. I would allow that. So that was kind of overwhelming and very surprising, but it opened the door. A person, her making that effort to reach out to me opened the door to an ongoing relationship of many years. And we've had Venerable Tuan Bach here to give a Dharma talk or a workshop maybe, and she and Pearl came with a bunch of other Vietnamese nuns to Hokyoji to practice with us. And I've given talks at Tuan Bach's monastery in California. So there's just been an ongoing relationship. Could you share a screen briefly? And bing. Yeah, that's all right. We're learning the technology. So while this is coming up, I'll just tell you, I'm going to share a picture of Pearl Tan Chao, arranged for a visit by a large delegation of Vietnamese monks from a leadership team for the sect that they are a part of, which is called, I'm just going to keep talking. You don't need to look at that screen. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So anyway, we had numerous monks come and visit MZMC, and we may see that picture or not. And if the pictures don't materialize, well, we have our imagination. So anyway, so years ago, one of us said, someday we should travel to Vietnam together. Venerable Tuan Bach says it was me. I say it was her. Regardless, it came to be, and it was really wonderful. Oh, could you go to next slide, please? Okay, yeah, so these are, you can see our gate here, and a number of nuns. This is Tan Chao on the second from the left. And they made a brief visit here, and it was quite wonderful. And that's it. You can stop the screen share for now. Thank you. So as I talk about my trip, I just want to point out the challenge of making generalizations, having a couple weeks to engage with another culture, another Buddhist tradition. The generalizations I make could be very inaccurate. I'll try and do my best to share something about the inspiration and what I've learned. And in particular, it's really good to be careful, I think, as a predominantly, I and many people here are Western Buddhists of European descent who've converted to a religion, and to really be respectful to the whole range of Buddhist expression in Asia, I think is extremely important. Anyway, one thing, so while I was there, people said, well, I didn't know this, but I looked it up. The communist government monitors and regulates religious activity in Vietnam. And a couple different people said, just don't talk about politics. So that was part of my experience. But I will say that at many times when I had an opportunity to speak publicly, like when I was opening a Dharma talk or on other occasions, I would say something like this. I remember growing up in the United States as a young child and realized the US was making a brutal war in Vietnam. And I had a real sense of the horror of the suffering there. And I want to acknowledge that and really acknowledge the fact that seeing that was part of what set my feet on the path of being a Buddhist as a person who wanted to be committed to a life of compassion and creating peace. And so this generally seemed to be a well-received message, but I will say overall, it was just a topic of not a great deal of interest to any of the people I talked to. They just tended to be like, thank you. And then that was a long time ago, and we're going forward. So I don't know the reasons why that was true, but it was very evident. And I remember specifically one person just saying, we're just going forward. So, all right. So, this evoked some strong feelings of humility because people were incredibly generous and open throughout the trip, everywhere I went, to a degree that was, yeah, truly humbling. The other thing I'll say is, I was invited in as a teacher, and I spent a lot of time with monastics whose commitment to practice is enormous, and the things they have given up to devote themselves to Buddhism, they've taken 200 or 300 precepts, are enormous. And so it's humbling to just be in that situation. And I just want to acknowledge those things up front. So anyway, I was predominantly spending time with people from the Truklam, or bamboo forest tradition, which was founded by a contemporary of the teacher probably most of you know of, named Thich Than Thu. And so this teacher who founded Truklam, or bamboo forest, is Thich Than Thu. And basically people from the bamboo forest tradition will say Thich Nhat Hanh is very famous in around the world, and especially in Europe and the United States. And in Vietnam, the really big 20th century teacher is Thich Than Thu, who founded a Buddhist movement which now has several thousand monastics and many, many thousands of lay followers and temples all over the country, as well as many temples in the United States, and one in Egan named Gyak Tam, which is quite small. It's kind of like ours, it's a house. So anyway, the bamboo forest tradition, I think one of the reasons we've been able to connect, and I've been able to connect, is it has many similarities with Soto Zen. So many of the ritual elements are similar. The basic approach to meditation practice, which I'll talk about, is very similar, but there are plenty of refreshing differences. And the reason for this similarity is they both really emerge from the earliest layer of Chinese Chan. So for those of you who are into this sort of thing, they trace their lineage from Sengsan, the third ancestor, and the Vietnamese monk Vien Chieu, who then came to Vietnam and founded Truklam, which then basically faded away completely and was revived by Thich Than Thu in the mid 20th century. So anyway, when I first showed up, I arrived. Could you show a slide? At Trung Phuc Temple in Hanoi. So we can go next slide. So this is, one back. There you go. So this is Trung Phuc, a lot of motorbikes in Vietnam. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so you can see here, you may be able to tell in the foreground, there are 2 stories. There are 2 Dharma halls in there, and in the back you can see a higher pagoda roof. So there are 3 stories in the back. Those are about 5 Dharma halls, each of which could probably hold about 300 or 400 people. One of them is for eating, and then they hold various other purposes. It's a very large complex. It houses about 150 monastics, and when I was there, it was on a weekend, so there were also a couple hundred lay people there visiting. So we could go to next slide. Here you can just see, this is from one of the upper decks. Looking back, you can kind of see tall buildings of Hanoi. And then this whole left side, I never saw any of that. I walked around there for days. It's a big place. And one more, please. So this is an altar. This is kind of a typical altar. There are at least a half a dozen of these at Trung Phuc. And while I was in Vietnam, I probably saw 50 or more altars of about this scale. So that Buddha is probably 6 or 7 feet tall. Those are grapefruits, so there are probably 60 grapefruits as offerings on the altar in most altars at any time. Those do get eaten, by the way, so they put them on there for a while, and then people eat them. Anyway, so I looked at our altar and I thought, geez, this is kind of, I don't know, having altar envy. But actually, when I asked Pearl and Tuan Bach about when that delegation from Truklam came here, they said, they thought it was really wonderful to just see a space that was so spare and serene. So that was sweet to hear. Both are inspiring. Okay, so I think we can go off the screen share now. So there's a lot of ritual on my visit. So, and I think what I want to talk about this ritual to kind of illustrate both the commonality and the difference between our traditions, and also an element that I will highlight throughout the talk, which was the enormous power of embodied devotional practice that I felt in my time with folks in the bamboo forest tradition, and actually other folks from Vietnam. So I got there, and I had to give a Dharma talk like about 3 hours after I arrived in Vietnam. So I was a little tired, but anyway, the Dharma talk involved, one, going into a reception hall and having a big formal ceremony of inviting the speaker to talk. Then there was a procession with a whole bunch of people with a bell ringer at the front and the back as we walked through the whole temple to get to the Dharma hall. As we got into the Dharma hall, everyone stands up and is standing in gasho and bowing forward as we get up. Then there's a bunch of chanting, and then there's some talking. So I was like, wow, this is a lot going on. And you might think, that's crazy. But actually, almost all the elements of this ritual are things that we do here. So we don't actually have a formal ritual of asking people to give talks, but the procession element with bell at the front and the back and people walking to the hall, we do this at our initiation and ordination and shuso ceremony. So many of you have experienced this. The standing up, we did this when I arrived here at MZMC 20 years ago. We were still doing what I would call the normal or traditional approach to giving Dharma talks, where there's a bell to summon the speaker in. The speaker comes in, everyone stands. There's a series of bows and there's a chant. So we've removed a lot of these ritual forms because we found that people who had no connection to the tradition were finding them really overwhelming and like, oh, I don't know what to do. And so we've made changes to try and make a more inclusive opportunity for a more multicultural environment here. But, I was like, oh, I actually know what this is. This isn't just me being completely overwhelmed. So that was sweet. And it was, people just gave themselves to it. And by the time we all sat down for the talk, we were in the zone. It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. So then they're like, okay, well, meditation starts at 3:30. So that was fun. I got the time wrong, and so somehow I ended up wandering around the temple in the middle of the night, and I found a couple hundred lay people sleeping on the floor in one of the Dharma halls at about 2:30. I was like, what's going on in there? It's just like floor completely covered with people. My sleeping room was supposedly private, but people kept coming in and sleeping there. And it was just kind of a normal room for this temple. It's a room about the size of maybe an average American bedroom with 6 beds. The beds are like a chest, like maybe you would think of it like a sea chest. So it's about 6 feet long. So the top opens, that's where your possessions go. The top closes, it's a wooden top, and there's a 1/2 inch thick bamboo mat that's the mattress. And that's where I slept while I was there, and that's where everyone slept. Thankfully, I slept. So anyway, yeah, lots of bells start ringing at 3 o'clock. Could you share us this next slide, please? We get to the screen and then go next. I'm going to show you the schedule. This is the daily schedule for bamboo forest things. So the first time I saw this, I was going to visit one in Sacramento, and I thought, oh, they've just got their retreat schedule up. This is the daily schedule. And I was like, how are you doing? There's a lot of quite old women at Junan in Sacramento, and they said, oh, we get a nap. So, I don't know. So I don't know how I would do at that, but there were a lot of people doing it, and they seemed really happy and energetic. So that's all I can tell you. So the lay folks who were there for the weekend retreat, it's not like here where we have a session and everyone just follows the schedule. Some people would do these things and some people wouldn't. So there are some people who remained sleeping in the hall, and some people got up and came down for meditation. So that's enough sharing of that. Thank you. I'm not going to dwell on that, but I think you get a sense of the rigor. The rigor is real. So People, I should say, just the atmosphere when we weren't like completely absorbed in these very formal rituals was just sort of quiet and joyful. And, people would just, I was kind of a standing out because I was clearly not, I didn't look very Vietnamese. So people would just look at me and just smile. They're just happy. Look at that. And, just laughing, and you'd see little people in all kind of corners of the temple having tea and chatting, or people just sweeping during the morning work practice very serenely. So it was quite beautiful. Um, the meditation method, I'll do talk about this for like 1 minute. It's really simple, so similar to the Soto Zen style. And that's because they both emerge from the Chinese silent illumination tradition, I would say. But um, so generally speaking, the instruction is to observe the breathing, maybe count the breath. And if the mind has become fairly quiet and stable and awareness is broad, then to just realize your Buddha nature. Sounds nice. Yeah. Just realize that you're complete. Like our tradition, this is a tradition that says, don't wait. Don't wait to be free from suffering. Just meet whatever is here. Meet whatever suffering is here, whatever joy is here, whatever sounds are here. And there's not even a meeting because there's not a you that has to go and get it. It's just already here. So, this is a real commonality. So just to say something about commonality and difference, many things about this felt so different. I spent so much time, people had to, Tan Chao was with me translating almost all the time. And there were many things where I'm like, I have no idea what's happening, or like, what is going on? Just little things. Venerable Tuan Bach is like, you have to go in the front. You have to go in the front. Men first. She's like, in America, it's always ladies first. I'm like, okay. So all kinds of little differences that you can't detect. So many commonalities, many differences. And this is just something I've really noticed when people move between different Buddhist communities. One person will go from here to common ground. They'll be like, it was so different. Oh my gosh, it's totally, the way they're practicing. And then another person will come back and it's like, it's kind of the same thing. I don't know. So apparently sameness and difference are perspectival phenomenon. Sorry, that was a big word, but so a huge, one of the big things that I was able to receive and feel so grateful for was just being around such a natural, constant flow of devotion and dana. So dana being generosity or giving, the first paramita, or just a central pillar of Mahayana Buddhist practice. And of course, we practice dana here by putting money in the red bowl after talks, or giving money to membership and things like that, and listening to our friends, in so many ways. But it was really palpable. People gave me a lot of things. I left with a backpack so stuffed with gifts, I didn't know what to do. It was almost embarrassing. And at some point, Tan Chao said to me, I think your job here is to just let people enjoy the joy of giving you things. And I was like, ah. So, I'd been there for a couple days and I was wearing samue throughout the trip. The Japanese robes are very heavy and hard to transport, and not get all wrinkly and stuff. So I was just wearing samue, and I was wearing my okesa for a Dharma talk. And one of the nuns came up after the first day and was like, you need real robes. You need our Vietnamese robes. So when you go to temples, people know what's going on. And I was like, oh, okay. And they're like, come with me. And they dragged me into the back of the temple, and we're going through this giant maze-like thing. And suddenly there's this lady in the back with all these sewing machines and fabric. And they just started, whoa, I'm like, okay, I'm just a body now. I'm just a body now. And the pure attention to wanting to give me these clothes and take care of me was so palpable. And so we had to leave to do some site visits later that day. So the woman who's like kind of the sewing master there, she's like, okay, and she's like, oh, these don't fit, and she's taking measurements. And she's okay, and I don't know what's going on. It's all in Vietnamese. But after breakfast, she came down and she gave me these robes. She says, let's try these on. And I put them on, and I was like, thank you very much. And her eyes were brimming with tears that she could give this to me. She had skipped her breakfast. They only get 2 meals a day in this temple. So joyful that she could just give someone this effort in these garments. And I thought, wow, this is powerful. And to me, I was thinking, oh, this seems different. I don't know if this is something I want to develop and learn. But I just remembered I served as my teacher, Tim Burkett's attendant for 2 years, and I remember the joy, the utter joy and stillness of being in the kitchen after the Dharma talk on a sesshin, preparing a pot of tea and a couple treats to bring upstairs, and being so happy that I could do that, and to just walk in and go, here you go. So the devotional element of practice seemed very strong there. I mean, I cannot tell you how many altars I have walked up to in Vietnam and bowed to. A lot. I've been traveling around the US a lot. I've bowed to a lot more altars in Vietnam in 2 weeks. We just go to a place, walk in, everyone will move up to the altar. A lot of the temples are set up so it's basically just a place to do bows at an altar. So Truklam temples are set up for meditation because it's a meditation tradition. But most temples, it's basically like you go in and there's a tiny little space in front of each of these giant altars, and people come in, they do their bows. Every once in a while, there'll be some chanting or some service, and they just put their head on the ground, and that's it. Or some people will do standing bows. So there is an odd mix, and this seems fairly different from any Buddhist stuff I've encountered in the US. There's kind of a mix between tourism and devotional Buddhism that's very strong. And basically, like if you went to Notre Dame, you'd probably see a bunch of people going around lighting candles, being deeply, sitting in the pews praying, and then there are other people who are just like, dang, look at that stained glass. So similar thing, and I think you can see that also at really beautiful mosques in Turkey. I don't remember the names of them, and religious sites in the Holy Land as well. So even though they seem very foreign, I was like, wait a minute, this is not that weird. So there are a lot of. Could you share screen and go to next slide, please? There are a lot of just incredibly beautiful buildings and a lot of devotion to creating infrastructure. And this goes back. So this is like a pretty old temple. And this is some of the folks I was traveling with, Venerable Twambach on my right, or on the left of the screen directly next to me. So many, many beautiful temples. This is kind of old and small. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here we are in front of a more modernly built. So this one was the site of a famous Vietnamese folkloric story where a princess, an ancient princess from the Tran tradition, a Tran kingdom, was going to be burned, ceremonially burned on her husband's funeral pyre, and managed to escape. She came to this site, supposedly, and ordained as a nun and spent her life there and was the abbess. So it's a huge temple complex. There's like a 12-story pagoda that I didn't even notice. Like I noticed it, but no one mentioned it. Like that seems kind of noticeable. And they're like, oh, that's not even that interesting. There was a lot of stuff there. Behind these gates, you go, this is a kind of a traditional gate, three doors. You go through and there's a bunch of different temples. There's one to Mahapajapati, one to the Tran princess, one to just the Buddhas. Oftentimes there'll be local secular figures. So you're like in a temple and there's a bunch of Buddhas, and then over here there's like a former king or a general or a scholar. So a lot of people will, well, actually many Truklam folks would say like, oh, most people in Vietnam, they're not really doing Buddhism, they're just doing ancestor worship. So I'm not going to say that. If you're Vietnamese and you call it Buddhism, you get to call it Buddhism. It's not my job to figure out what that is. But I'm just kind of relating this kind of attitude among bamboo forest folks. But having said that, we would go into this place and we'd walk in and we'd do all our bows to the ancestors. So I don't know, it was quite wonderful. I will say 5 days a week, one of the priests comes through and does 3 bows to our ancestor altar. Did you know that? We have an ancestor altar in the Buddha hall for Katagiri Roshi, and the doshi comes in and does 3 bows. It's this, I went into all these temples and guess what I did? 3 bows to the altar. So these traditions are very old, and we do uphold them here, and they're beautiful. I'll just say something about the clothes here. I'm still wearing, this is before I got the robes, which then I wore for the rest of the trip, just wearing samaway, but monastics will wear gray or brown. Lay folks who are visiting temples will wear the gray robes. You can tell the difference by the hair. Lay people have hair, monastics don't. And then yellow is for, I don't know exactly the designation, but something like abbots or teachers. So that guy in the middle is, he built this place. He came there, he talked a lot about fundraising. He was like, I cannot believe I got this done. I mean, the place, I don't want to dwell on this, but he probably had to raise like $20 million. It's like a giant facility. And he was like, it was pretty hard. But then there were people, you know, hundreds, maybe thousands of people visiting who finding it really meaningful to be there and connect to their history. So, yeah. So Donna was big. What's the next image? Can you just show me? Oh yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just. That's a statue of Kanon, Kuan Yin, Kwanam, Avalokiteshvara, if you like, the one who hears the cries of the world. That's probably about 40 feet tall. So this is on top. This is from the vacation I went on with Colleen. This is on top. We took a cable car to the highest mountain in Vietnam, and they have this complex of buildings like this. It's a private theme park that's mostly temples. So you can see this odd mix of religious devotion and commerce, but you know, it's very beautiful in case you can't tell. And it's pretty inspiring. Kanon is out there looking out over the whole country of Vietnam from the north, just hearing. And it's good to remember. Compassion is pervasive and accessible. So let's go to the next slide. So this is the abbess of a temple we visited. She's 96, still working. Maybe go to the next slide. People just loved her. I mean, not just her, but many abbots we saw, people would just flock and get on their knees and just sort of cuddle up to them, you know, they'd be sitting in large chairs. So I guess you all, whatever. Anyway, but you could feel the embodied desire to just pour their love into these people. They're just people. And then the people would be very loving. And it was very sweet to see. This abbess, I don't know if you can tell, everyone is laughing. That is because we got into her temple and we were looking around. We found her chant book. She's been chanting out of for like 50 or 60 years. And then she started handing out money, which I thought was really weird. And they were like, I was like, why did she just handed me a bunch of money. I was like, why did you just hand me money? And they said, oh, it's like at New Year's, your grandmother gives you money. It's good luck. I was like, oh, okay, great. I got to call my grandma. My grandmothers are both dead. They were very generous and I love them. So anyway, it was just really funny. Yeah. So we see this devotion, this giving. People would just walk up to monks and give them little envelopes full of money. People would leave money on altars. Um, but I do want to say then after I think we can stop the screen share here. Thank you. After this trip, when we were on the vacation, we went and visited a couple temples. And I don't want to dwell on this, but basically what was happening was people were bringing vast amounts of ritual objects to burn in order to gain personal benefits. And it was I'm not like, that's how you would say it. You're like, why are you making that offering? To get benefit. And people would say, I was told some people I was Buddhist and they'd be like, oh, so you chant to get benefits? And in fact, we had 3 guides after I left the religious part of the trip. 2 of them were into meditation. So they were really thought it was really cool that I was. They didn't associate meditation with Buddhism. The meditation for them was principally about kind of a health practice. And both of them talked about how it prevented and healed cancer. So just kind of some of our understandings about what Buddhism is about. We encountered very, very different views. And I mean, we went into one temple where people were just throwing gigantic ritual offerings, huge like paper horses. They're not paper mache, but imagine like a giant paper mache horse into these giant kilns, offering kilns to burn them. So they'd have a ritual where they do a chant and a priest does something. And then they throw these things in, and then you're going to get some good outcomes. So I didn't try that, but it was very different. And like I say, it's important, even though you might be like, "Whoa, that doesn't sound right to me," to just be like, "This is very meaningful to millions of people," and to have some humility about like that's what Buddhism. That's a big part of Buddhism for them, and that matters. Anyway, the folks in the bamboo forest tradition are very like explicitly like, we don't do that. We have prohibitions of anything resembling it and so forth. So they really try and differentiate from that. Okay, so I'm gonna keep talking here. So we visited Thich Nhat Hanh's root temple where he trained as a young man and as a child, where he was ordained, and then where he returned after his exile from Vietnam was rescinded and he was able to return to Vietnam. He returned there and spent his final years there. And it was a deeply moving experience. So I would say, the first books I read about Buddhism were by Thich Nhat Hanh. His vision of engaged Buddhism has completely transformed my life. And a lot of my personal scholarship around Yogacara is basically because that's the structure he uses to form his movement. So, we were all sitting around before we went to his temple, and I said, I'm probably going to cry. So just get ready. But that warning apparently inoculated me because I was the only one who did not cry. So we went there and there were just these heartfelt expressions. Could you go to screen share? And you can see next slide will be the gate into the temple. So I'm here with Tuan Bach, Tan Chao, and a couple of the nuns from the temple. And next slide, please. This is the room, the abbot's quarters at the temple. So that's the bed, that's Thich Nhat Hanh's bed, although he had a hospital bed at the end of his life. There's a little altar there. We're just doing vows as we do to the altar of our ancestors. And then next slide. And this just gives you a sense of, Thich Nhat Hanh spent so much time about just walking, just being outside and walking and listening. And so we did that, and I wanted to share a picture. So you can stop the screen share. So yes, there was singing, there were stories. It was very beautiful. Then last visit I want to talk about is my visit to Vien Chieu Monastery, where I'm moving. See y'all later. It's actually a monastery, you could call it a convent, so it's only nuns, about 150 nuns in residence there. It was built in 1975 after what the abbess there, who's been the abbess the entire time, referred to as the Liberation, which, by the way, you may know is the end of the American war in Vietnam. And she said, yeah, this was just uncultivated, unbroken ground. There were snakes everywhere that were venomous, and we just got to work. And now it's a beautiful complex with many lovely buildings and gardens that are self-sustaining for the community there, and about 150 nuns. Could you show the next slide? Um, so this is just a picture of the monks' hall. On the ground floor is basically an open room with about 40 of those beds as I described. So that's just like a wooden chest with a 1/4-inch bamboo mat on it for a mattress. Upstairs is the meditation hall, but there are many, many other buildings there. Next slide, if you would. This is the garden. It's people just wearing the famous conical hat and growing the food that we ate, which was truly amazing. The food culture in Vietnam is incredible. You know, just everywhere you go, people are just growing food. The food you eat is often grown within a few miles of where you live. And next slide. On the dinner, on like the last night, the abbess, who's sitting here to my left or on the right of the screen, came out. So I cannot just describe how much you would like to be with her. So when I first met her, it was a very formal greeting, like we're inviting this man to be the temple. And I was like, well, she's very severe. You know? And then she came out and was just so warm and curious and supportive, supportive. And you can see this nun who's kneeling at her feet, a common gesture. You see people just, you know, Tan Shao and several other younger nuns were earlier, just came in when she came out, because she doesn't usually come out into this area, and just got down on their knees and put themselves at her feet and just basked in her love by giving her love. Simple. So anyway, there were some very fun stories told at this place. So I'm going to tell you a little story, which is that the treasurer is not shown here. You can't see her. This is Tuan Bach in the bottom with her kind of back to the screen, Venerable Tuan Bach. And anyway, they told many funny stories, but they said, yeah, so our treasurer is an amazing songwriter. And I had heard Tuan Bach sing songs that she had written, and they're quite wonderful. She sang some in Thich Nhat Hanh's bedroom. But anyway, so she had great songs. They were like the treasure, just this amazing songwriter. I have the songbook at my house, so get ready. Anyway, so they were like, yeah, we have this, she's just this great songwriter. And I had heard the chanting at this place was unbelievably exquisite. You know, they would have long repentance ceremonies in the evening, and it was just hauntingly beautiful. So anyway, they were just talking about this, and then they said, but you know, when she first started writing the songs, Thich Than Thu, who's the founder of the whole movement, is kind of like the Pope, said, wait a minute, there's a precept against singing and dancing. We have 250 precepts. And so he called her from their temple, from Vien Chieu to the head temple, Vien Chieu. He said, you need to come report. It's kind of scary. And so they were like, we got a motorbike, and Tuan Bach drove the motorbike, and the treasurer jumped on the back, and we went over there, and we got in, and Tuan Bach was so excited about this story. She was like, it was amazing. She has like such reverence for Thich Than Thu. I mean, it's amazing. That was her teacher. But she says, we went there, and he said, why are you singing these songs? This is against the precepts. And the treasurer, she said she didn't explain or say anything. She just started singing. She just sang this song that she'd written. And she finished. And Thich Than Thu said, okay. And they still have this incredible singing culture there. So I gave a Dharma talk there, and afterwards it was like Q&A. And one of the nuns got up and just sang a song in English, written by Thich Nhat Hanh. And then she said, okay, now you sing a song. So I want to bring Vien Chieu here. We are hoping that maybe some nuns from there can visit at some point, and I'm trying to work on the long-term vision of making that happen with them. But we can bring them here by bringing our voices. So I would like to sing the song that we sang together right here. You probably know this song. This is going to be your part, which they did really well. So you know, this is the song that goes, I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Let's do this call and response. I'm gonna put on my long gray robe down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna put on my long gray robe down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I don't think they can hear you at Vien Chieu. I'm gonna walk on that path of peace down by the riverside. Oh yeah, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna walk on that path of peace down by the riverside, down by the riverside. All right, so we can take off the screen share. We can all hang. Maybe it'd be a little scary to be singing in your little screens there, but I think you were all good. I'll bet you were all singing really nice back at your houses. Bringing our voices. Being together, but being exactly who we are. So the last thing I'll say about just something that really struck me about being there was this moving between deeply concentrated, formal, solemn rituals and utter ridiculousness and joyfulness, playfulness, or just simple, natural how we are-ness. And I just saw this so much, and we would go to these temples and everyone would just be like, oh, we walk in the door and suddenly everyone would just converge around the altar and the bodies would find the stillness that is our birthright, and bodies would come down to the ground and we get up and then maybe we learned something about where we were. Or people would be very reverent to me because I was a teacher, and then I would be like, they're all just laughing at me and talking in Vietnamese. Pretty sure that's what's going on, you know? And so composure and freedom, the formality and the commitment to step into the silence and the stillness of our practice as a way to access something far more free, far more joyful, and far more beautiful. Can you share screen? It turns out that in Vietnam, it's quite common, next slide please, for there to be dogs at temples. And apparently it's common for your attendant to give you bunny ears. But she can't even do it because she's not tall enough. So, we had a lot of fun. I have such gratitude for Tan Chao and her enormous devotion, without which there's no way this trip could have possibly happened. And then next slide, please, Venerable Tuan Bach, whose commitment to practice, whose 50 years of monastic practice, whose year of silent solo retreat, just emerges in the way she moves through the world in her body, the way she looks, the way she speaks. Stop the screen share. Thank you so much, Venerable Tuan Bach. Thank you all for your kind attention. And we have a little time for questions. And are people going to be able to hear questions? I think so. Okay, cool. Yeah. Questions? Go ahead.
Do you have were you able to ask her, do you know a background story of Tuan Box, how she became monastic and what that story was?
I don't know that much. I know she was like a business person, and I can't remember. I've talked to her about it, but I will say central to it was her encounter with Thich Than Thu, which she was like, I want to be doing what this person is doing. So those are the two things that stand out. Beyond that, I don't remember very well. Sorry.
Thank you, Ben. This is Ted. It was great to hear about the devotional practice. And as you know, we're studying the Lotus Sutra in practice period. And I was just wondering if you saw any references to the Lotus Sutra or could see its influence on this trip.
Nice question. I heard, people would just be talking and the Dharma, because we're a bunch of people doing Buddhist stuff, Dharma would come in. People related some of the stories from the Lotus Sutra, like the gem in the pocket, which the person doesn't know they have, or the poor, yeah, I guess that's the same one. And that also the burning house, and the Buddha using whatever means he can get to get people out of the burning house, even if it seems disingenuous. So those stories were there. I don't remember anyone referring specifically to the Lotus Sutra. No, actually, now I remember one person I was like, what are your favorite sutras? And they're like, yeah, Lotus Sutra. So we didn't talk a lot about what sutras people were studying, but that was definitely part of the culture there. But, I will say for me, what was really evident was the devotional part had more to do with just the body. People were just like, what Buddhism is going to a temple and bowing and being reverent. That's mostly what it is, or for some people, and more than it is for people here. So it's less rooted in some ideas, and just like, that's what you do. You just go and you feel that. Yeah. So, but I will say many of the textual things, they chant the Heart Sutra in the morning, just like we do here 5 days a week. They do refuges and acknowledgement karma before that, just like we do on Tuesday and Saturday. So many, many deep commonalities in the texts that are upheld.
Thank you.
Other, Steve.
It seemed like you were sleeping in screenless rooms.
That is correct. Yeah, when I was at Vien Chieu, where it's a little bit more jungly, they had a mosquito net for me. But yes, it's very open air there. There's not a lot of mosquitoes if you're kind of thinking about mosquito-borne illness, which in parts of Vietnam is a major concern, but not where we were.
I was just thinking about mosquitoes.
Yeah. Yeah, they were making fun of me at Vien Chieu. They're like, yeah, they love the fresh blood. I was like, have you ever been to northern Minnesota? We arm wrestled. Okay, I see a hand in the back. Go ahead.
You said that there is an incredible food culture. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about some of the monastic meals and what that experience was like.
Yeah. So the monastic meals is very basically there's a lot of soup that people eat in Vietnam, and the monastic meals were often like a soup, breakfast soup, lunch soup. I don't know what they eat. There's like a snack at dinner. It's not a full meal. No, there was a small meal. It was also generally soup. But I will just say the food tends to be very fresh and handmade. And the meals themselves, they were surrounded by ritual, just as they are here during a formal sesshin. And the chants that we would do before the meals were very similar to what we do here. We chant, reflect on the effort that brought us food, whether we've eliminated this from ours, but whether we're worthy of this offering. We take this food as medicine to sustain our lives. We take this food to sustain all beings, and so that all beings may attain enlightenment. So it's actually the same text. So yeah, there'd be a little ritual, and then we'd, in the temple, we'd eat in silence. except for they would talk to me because I was such a numbskull and didn't know how to eat things. And that was part of the, you know, the sense of devotion in Donna. They're like, we're here to take care of people. And if being quiet is going to impede that, then okay, let's talk for a minute. And people were constantly like handing me food, putting food, like all the best food would always be taken from one end of the table and put on my plate, wherever it was. Yeah, the food, the last thing I'll say is you play with your food. Vietnamese, there's a lot of table assembly, so it feels very social because you're like putting things together and, that's sweet.
Can you speak a little more to how they eat and the playing with the foods?
You have like, there'll be some greens that you have to put into the soup, and then there's like, you assemble your own spring rolls at the table by getting the spring roll wrappers wet and putting stuff in them and things like that. Katie?
What is the Vietnamese tradition when becoming a monastic? Are you encouraged towards that as a child, or do adults choose it?
I don't have a very strong sense of this, but it seems like in the Bible forest tradition, it's more people who really feel a personal calling to the tradition. So it's certainly quite different than Soto Zen in Japan, where most, a very large number of monks and monastics are just people whose parents, or usually their father, was a monk, so they're like, you're going to be a monk, that's how it works. So it's much more sort of people making that choice. But I did, at one point I was with this laywoman who was trying to get me to convince her son to ordain. And I was like, you asked the wrong guy. We had a great conversation, and I think she was very happy with our conversation. It was, and I'm not into trying to get people to do stuff. So, other questions or thoughts? Maybe someone else on Zoom, anyone?
Yeah, I was wondering, did you do anything else fun while you were in Vietnam?
Oh my goodness, yeah. The vacation, come down to the place and talk to Colleen afterwards. We had a lot of fun. I mean, it's just a beautiful, physically unbelievably beautiful country with mountains and giant limestone formations and beautiful forests and beaches and all wonderful people and many, many different cultures. The Viet culture is actually just one of 38 distinct ethnic communities, at least in Vietnam. It's a huge history, and somehow I ended up at a couple theme parks, which I didn't know was going to happen, but I did go on a very small roller coaster, which was really scary. So, yeah, if you want to go on a vacation, it's an amazing place to go on a vacation. People were incredibly kind, open, and yeah, it's really sweet. I feel like, okay, I'll do one more question, then I gotta end. Go ahead.
Okay, unless somebody else has it better. This is simple. How many people spoke English or were bilingual, would you say?
There were quite a few people who could say like, hello, good morning, and then I would be deceived and find out, oh, you speak better English than I speak Vietnamese, but that's not saying much. So, English is probably the most common second language in Vietnam, but it is not common. So I would have really struggled to travel comfortably there without English-speaking guides and support. I mean, I'm sure people do and can, but I was very grateful to have people taking care of me with such kindness. So I tried to learn some Vietnamese. That's really hard. I was going to apologize at the beginning for my terrible Vietnamese pronunciation. Anyway, so sweet to be here with you and do what we're doing. Open up to what some other people are doing and see what happens. So may your practice be for the benefit of all beings. Thank you all. Turn it over to Jim for announcements.